If Kevin had known the elevator was busted, no way he'd have taken this gig. The dude lost his shit when all he got for his struggles was a write-up. Kevin couldn't hold back and told the lady she could go get her own damn food then. But realizing he screwed up, he started apologizing right away. If she complained, he'd get locked out of orders for a few days. Being broke, he didn't have much of a choice. Riding around town on his scooter, Kevin spotted some gates opening up. A few years back, they started opening up all over the world. These gates led to dungeons packed with monsters regular folks couldn't handle. That's when the gods decided to hook a few ordinary people up with insane powers. The chosen ones had one job: save humanity from those beasts. So people started calling them hunters. But to Kevin, all this supernatural crap was just another headache. The boss's call after being rude to the client didn't take long to come. Because of Kevin's attitude, the restaurant went with another delivery service. So now his boss dismissed him for a whole damn week. Suddenly, a loud noise came from the gates. But Kevin was too busy stressing about how he'd make rent now. He figured if he were a hunter, he'd be living his best life. Just as he was about to head home, he heard the sound of a harp. He got a new delivery request, but this one was different from all the others. Kevin had never seen an app like this or a notification like that. When he pulled up to the drop-off, he was staring at a massive palace. He thought either he was dreaming or the gods had finally chosen him to he escapes the slums. But his excitement got cut short by a new order notification. The request for nectar had him hella curious, so he accepted it. When he arrived, he was once again met with a magical-ass mansion. Looked like the gods lived there, and according to the map, this was where he had to pick up the order. He figured this was his shot to meet one of the gods and finally become a hunter. A stunning woman stepped out, and he knew instantly she was a goddess. But she immediately had a question about what a regular mortal was doing on Olympus. She demanded an explanation, but Kevin had no clue how he even got there. He showed her the delivery app, and she instantly knew this was Hermes doing. Normally, humans don't mess with stuff like this. But this time, the goddess decided to help Kevin out. He had to deliver the nectar as soon as possible without spilling a single drop. Kevin couldn't wrap his head around it. He thought he was done being a delivery guy. But even the gods were giving him side eyes and warnings. The thought of just ditching the apple juice-looking liquid crossed his mind. But remembering the customer was the goddess's brother, he figured he might as well shoot his shot. The guy was probably a god, too. Maybe he'd be down to take Kevin under his wing. Eventually, the exhausted dude finally made it to the drop-off spot. Walking into the estate to hand off the order, he got blasted with heat like a damn sauna. Seeing a huge dude with an even bigger sword, the courier straight up panicked. He started explaining himself ASAP, just so the man wouldn't think he was a thief. And just like that, the man realized this was the delivery his sister sent him. Kevin just couldn't wrap his head around the fact that the goddess and that dude were related. But the man quickly realized Kevin wasn't who he was expecting. He pointed his sword at Kevin, but the second he saw his nectar flask, he lowered it. After making sure Kevin hadn't taken even a sip, the guy let out a loud, hearty laugh. Kevin had no clue that one sip of that nectar could have turned him into a full-blown god. Just when he thought he could finally ditch the whole delivery gig, the flask got snatched from his hands. He was about to ask for just one sip, but it was already too late. The man downed the entire flask of nectar in one go. He liked Kevin. Dude delivered the order without a single delay. Introducing himself as Hephaestus, the man thanked Kevin for his hard work. Just as Hephaestus was about to leave, Kevin stopped him, because he hadn't paid yet. But Hephaestus just shrugged and said the payment was already handled. At first, Kevin had no clue what he meant, but then he remembered the weird delivery app. Opening it, he saw a notification. 1,000 points added to his account. Suddenly, a bright white light engulfed him, and next thing he knew, he was back in his bed. At first, Kevin thought it was all just a dream, but the notification was still there. He had no idea where he could even spend those points. But what really bummed him out was that he got so close to the gods and ended up with barely anything. His sulking got interrupted by another notification. It said the points could be exchanged in the shop. Opening the shop, Kevin got even more pissed. All they had was a bunch of useless junk. Seeing no hunter gear at all, he realized he'd probably never become one. Then a new notification popped up, and when he clicked it, he got 10,000 won. Turns out the app had a point-to-cash exchange system. In no time, bills were flying all over his room. This was exactly what Kevin wanted, and it all felt like some crazy dream. Still in disbelief, he treated himself to some bomb food at a cafe. He still had 10 million won left, and that had him feeling on top of the world. So much so that he started crying right there at the table, scaring the waitress. Suddenly, he saw on the news that a new member had joined the Hunter Guild. He froze when he heard that Hephaestus had become that lucky guy's patron. But at this point, Kevin didn't really care. Hephaestus was officially his best customer now. Stepping out of the cafe, he heard that strange sound again. A new order had come in. Before he could process it, he suddenly found himself in a stunningly magical garden. He was about to check what he had to deliver this time when he heard someone calling him. Standing before him was another breathtakingly beautiful goddess, Demeter. Turns out her nephew, Hephaestus, had told her all about Kevin. And once again, this whole divine family left Kevin shook. Heard Demeter needed a delivery, so the guy totally ran with it. After all, doing his usual job for the gods could make him some serious cash. Using her magic, Demeter created a one-of-a-kind gift for her daughter. She wanted to deliver it herself, but she couldn't leave her domain without a major reason. Suddenly, the whole place went dark, but Kevin didn't care as long as he got paid. He was about to check the delivery destination when a blinding white light hit him. He had no clue why he was suddenly back on Earth and decided to check the app. It pointed him to a station 8 kilometers away. Kevin was stunned. Demeter's daughter apparently lived in South Korea. Feeling pumped about the delivery, he set off on his journey. But he never would have accepted the job if he'd known she lived in the world's most dangerous dungeon. They called it the Hunter's Grave. It had claimed even the best of the best. He tried to calm himself down, thinking she'd be waiting for him at the entrance. But then out of nowhere, a map appeared, showing him exactly where to find her inside. He considered canceling the order, until he saw the mention of divine punishment. That meant getting turned into a pig. Kevin quickly realized he was screwed. There was no way he could have seen this coming. He didn't even know how to get past security without a hunter's license. Then a notification popped up that the shop had exactly what he needed. Scrolling through the list, he found something interesting: a freaking invisibility hat. Kevin was sure it was a scam, but while trying to cancel the order, he accidentally bought it. His anger flared. He had just spent a ridiculous amount on this stupid hat, but there was no turning back now, and time wasn't on his side. Slipping the hat on, he managed to sneak past security unnoticed. Finally, inside the dungeon, he started moving toward his destination. But deep in Tartarus, there was no one in sight. He called out for Demeter's daughter, only for a monster to appear instead. Kevin was certain this was the end for him. Then he remembered he could use the helmet one more time. But before he could activate it, a monster lunged at him, ready to devour him whole. That's when a little girl suddenly stopped it in its tracks. She was tiny, way too small to be here, and Kevin had no idea what was going on. But from resemblance, he quickly realized this was Demeter's daughter. Then another figure stepped forward, the ruler of the underworld himself, Hades. Kevin was the first human in millennia to dare step into his domain. But Hades assumed Kevin had stolen the invisibility helmet from him and immediately started choking him. Kevin tried to explain, and Persephone, Demeter's daughter, backed him up. Hades let him go, but demanded an explanation for his intrusion. Kevin wasted no time, explaining that he was just a delivery guy. The second Persephone saw the lunchbox from her mom, her excitement was impossible to hide. Kevin had assumed Demeter was Hades' wife, but turns out his true love was Persephone. Without thinking, Kevin blurted out that Hades was way too old for her. Hades' fury was instant, and Kevin thought that game was over. But then, to his shock, the god of the underworld burst out laughing. He never expected a mere human to have the guts to insult him. Since Kevin had amused him, Hades decided to let this one slide this time. Kevin couldn't believe his luck. He had just earned another 15,000 coins. Meanwhile, the Yunwon Guild had once again cleared out the monsters. They remained the undisputed #1 guild. The hunters were completely exhausted this time, and Andrew had put in the most effort. Guild leader Richard praised him. Without Andrew, the battle would have been much tougher. Meanwhile, the vice leader, Agatha, was busy collecting as many magic stones as possible. But then, she noticed something speeding toward them at an insane velocity. Their situation wasn't great. They were running dangerously low on energy. It seemed they had miscalculated. There were still monsters lurking in the dungeon's depths. Richard was ready to fight alongside Agatha, but the others refused to leave them behind. There was no time to argue, so Richard accepted their help. But just then, emerging from the shadows on his scooter, was none other than Kevin. He was absurdly calm, completely oblivious to how much he had scared everyone. Casually warning the hunters about the monsters ahead, He rode off as if nothing had happened. If Kevin cashed in his app points right now, he'd have 150 million won. He had been through a lot, but the moment he saw his money, all his exhaustion vanished. Meanwhile, the leader of the Yanwan Guild was wrapping up his conference. He decided not to mention the incident with Kevin. He couldn't figure out what had even happened. That day, Richard was so tired he didn't even consider chasing after him. Suddenly, he announced that he and Andrew would be heading out in search of celestial steel. Kevin was just about to enjoy some fried chicken when he got another order. This time, the customer was someone familiar, Hephaestus. Out of nowhere, Hephaestus appeared from around the corner, eyes filled with tears. He had been kicked out of his home, accused of getting drunk with his younger brother, Dionysus. However, Dionysus had immediately run off, leaving Hephaestus all alone. Now all he wanted was something to eat and drink. He was starving. He could have ordered anything, but he specifically requested meat and lots of alcohol. Soon Kevin arrived with fried chicken and beer, the very meal he had been about to eat himself. As they sipped beer and ate chicken, Hephaestus and Kevin admired the beautiful sky. The chicken was small, but to Hephaestus, it was the best meat he had ever tasted. In gratitude, Hephaestus sent Kevin 15,000 more coins. The god was so happy that he nearly hugged Kevin in excitement. But then a voice called out to them. It was the goddess Hephaestus' beloved. Kevin was shocked that such a beautiful woman was married to such a pathetic-looking guy. The woman was clearly upset that her husband was drinking again. Kevin agreed. Hephaestus was definitely in the wrong and should apologize. Then the woman turned to him and introduced herself, Aphrodite. She apologized for her husband's behavior, but Kevin reassured her that it was no big deal. Suddenly, Hephaestus asked if he could place another order. This time, Kevin had to head to Suwon to retrieve something called celestial steel. His destination was the Sori mines, and he couldn't believe he was heading into yet another dungeon. This one seemed safer than the last, but in reality, it was far more dangerous. Kevin stated that he couldn't go into the dungeon. Last time, he had barely made it out alive. He explained that his invisibility helmet had saved him before, but now it was broken. Hephaestus offered to fix it, since after all, he was the god of smithing. With the repaired and upgraded helmet, Kevin set off once again. Suddenly, he found himself surrounded by a crowd. He hadn't expected the dungeon to be so popular. It seemed he would have to go much deeper this time. After half an hour, he finally found a secluded spot with no one around. At last, he spotted the minerals. Somewhere among them was the moon steel he needed. Startled by a skeleton, Kevin slammed the brakes, damaging his scooter. But then he remembered he could just buy a new one, so he happily moved on. After riding a bit further, he finally found the moon steel, glowing with a red light. However, he hadn't planned how to transport the massive chunks of ore back. He struggled to extract the steel until the app sent him a hint. Following the system's advice, he checked the shop and found a miner's pickaxe. But the pickaxe was ridiculously expensive, so he thinking about renting one instead. The journey back promised to be long and difficult, so he decided not to leave. Just as he loaded the ore onto his scooter, a monster appeared behind him. Jumping onto his ride, Kevin sped toward Andrew's location. Recognizing Kevin, Andrew asked for a ride. He too was being chased by the monster. Upon returning from the dungeon, Kevin was furious with Hephaestus. He had almost died, and no one had even bothered to warn him about the dangers. But Hephaestus didn't see what the problem was. Aside from the high speed of the scooter, speed wasn't the issue. The god's request had been absurdly dangerous. Hephaestus was stunned by the sheer size of the boulder. He had never seen such a massive chunk of pure ore. The largest piece of steel he had ever worked with was a fraction of this size. Because of its unprecedented value, Hephaestus paid Kevin even more, 50,000 points. Meanwhile, the news reported that the Sori mines were closing due to collapsed tunnels. Andrew's task had been simple, yet he had failed, and now the mine was shut. He had been the last to leave, and Richard wanted to know exactly what had happened. When Andrew mentioned seeing the same courier again, the guild leader became intrigued. Richard suspected that Kevin might be an unregistered hunter. Since Andrew had memorized the scooter's model and license plate, he could assist in the investigation. The guild leader believed that this mysterious courier might be a valuable asset to their guild, so Richard wanted to meet him personally. Meanwhile, Kevin was once again enjoying his earnings. Now sitting on 500 million won, he figured it was time to find a better place to live. However, he wasn't sure how much longer his invisibility helmet would last. As soon as Kevin stepped into the store, he got drawn to a badass obstacle race driver suit. The dude figured it was a solid investment and decided to cop it. After trying it on, Kevin didn't feel a thing. That could only mean one thing. This suit was definitely not average gear. Andrew was totally wiped out from looking for Kevin. He had followed leads all the way from Suwon to Seoul. Even the dude's scooter number didn't help, because the guy never broke the law. Andrew was so pissed, he didn't even notice when the light turned green. A guy on a scooter, just like the one Kevin was riding, told him about it. The scooter was the same color, and the damage was in the same spots. Suddenly, Andrew had a light bulb moment. It was the guy he was after, and he took off after him. The hunter was going to catch a cab, but the driver just kicked him to the curb. So, the only choice left was to keep running in the same direction. But after a while, Andrew was so dead tired he collapsed. A passerby recognized him, but the dude pretended she was mistaken. Now the hunter had no clue where the delivery guy had gone. Suddenly, Andrew heard a crash, and something told him it was the courier's doing. The sound came from the mountain, so the guy sprinted in that direction. He then found a rock with a perfectly drilled hole in it. Only a few could have made such a precise hole. Andrew guessed it was done with magic or divine power. Kevin never thought he'd be able to drill such a massive hole. He knew his suit boosted his abilities, but not by that much. Out of nowhere, a new delivery came through. But the sound was kinda different this time. He had to go back to a dungeon, this time at the Huago Mountains in Punchin. But this dungeon was different. It had almost no monsters. Kevin planned to handle the delivery tomorrow, once his suit's effect refreshed. What Kevin didn't know was that while he was chilling at the cafe, Hunter Agatha was watching him. Meanwhile, Andrew was telling Richard they'd catch the courier soon. Dozens of hunters were searching for him, using the poster Andrew made. The dude was sure the courier was crazy strong, and the hole in the rock was definitely his handiwork. But Richard was worried that the competition might catch the courier first. The Black Dragon Guild was ranked second, and they'd been climbing fast in the past few years. They'd do anything to expand their power. Lately, they'd been acting shady, so Yanwan Guild needed to figure out their game plan. The internet said the dungeon wasn't that popular, but it turned out to be the complete opposite. Kevin snuck into the dungeon, invisible helmet on, passing by the guards. He was a bit spooked since, according to the map, his client was at the top of the mountain. He was worried the mountain might turn into a monster and start chasing him again. But there was no other option. Just as he was about to start climbing, someone called out to him. Looking down, Kevin freaked out. There was a talking monkey head in front of him. He was the one who wanted to place the order. Kevin was even more shook when he found out the client's name was Sun Wukong. The Monkey King got convicted there by order of the Emperor just for snatching a couple of peaches. And now Kevin had to deliver a box to him, which was in a pile of junk. The box wasn't too far, so Kevin dipped right away to go find it. Amanda, the boss of the Black Dragon Guild, told her hunters to take on the boss. She knew that if they took him down, they'd be the top guild and outshine the Yanwan. The hunters had no heads up about the boss fight, so they had no clue how to handle him. The fight conditions made it even crazier. Anyone who dipped from the battle was going to get smoked. Their weapons were trashed too, but they had no choice. Kevin was on his way for the order when the ground started shaking, and monsters started run away. The dude saw smoke rising and knew this was bad news. But since he had a special suit on, he figured he'd roll up and check it out. The Black Dragon's hunters were straight up struggling against the boss. But the guild leader wasn't even thinking about helping them. After a while, even without her, they thought they had finally taken the boss down. But nah, that was just the start of round 2. Right then, Kevin pulled up to the battlefield through the bushes. Meanwhile, Andrew was planning to head to Punchin, where the boss fight was popping off. Near the dungeon gates, instead of guards, he ran into some snitch from the Black Dragon Guild. Dude tried to block Andrew from getting through, but it was already too late. The guild had bribed some guy from the Association for Security, and Andrew figured out they were trying to take the boss out. So the guy rushed to warn their rivals. 'Cause the boss fall rage mode when he hit phase 2. The second Kevin saw the boss, he knew even with his suit, he was cooked. Then out of nowhere, he recognized someone. Amanda, the boss of the Black Dragon Guild. One of the hunters got out of the fight, and Kevin saw they were fixing to off him. But the courier came in clutch, clocking the dude who was about to yeet the hunter into the fire. Even though the guy was built like a tank, Kevin knocked him out cold with one punch. But while saving the dude, the courier should have kept his head on a swivel. He ended up surrounded. The guild leader was mad as hell. They were this close to taking the win. They could have tossed the dude into the fire core and won, but now they needed a whole new game plan. Meanwhile, Kevin wasn't wasting time. He was set on soloing the boss. He spotted a dent in its head and figured that had to be its weak spot, so he socked it. Seeing Kevin's move, Amanda told her archers to put him down. Arrows started flying past him, but he dodged like a pro. And in the chaos, some arrows landed straight in the boss's mouth. That woke up the boss's next phase, and the monster went full rampage mode, wrecking everything. It straight up wiped out the whole Black Dragon Guild army. Amanda was freaking out. They had no clue how to deal with this thing now. One wrong move, and they'd be toast. But Kevin wasn't about to back down. He kept throwing hands with the boss. And soon enough, he landed the killing blow, taking down the dungeon boss for good. Andrew saw the whole thing, and that was it. No way this guy was just some regular courier. He made up his mind then and there. He was dragging Kevin to the guild today, no matter what. Amanda ordered her crew to grab the dude as soon as the dust settled. He had to be running on fumes after that fight. But out of nowhere, Andrew rolled up in front of the Black Dragon Guild. He just found out they lured a newbie into their guild just to sacrifice him to the boss. So Amanda told her people to gear up for a fight. But suddenly someone told her the courier they were supposed to snatch had straight up vanished. Andrew didn't get how the hell did he disappear after that explosion. This whole courier hunt had turned into a massive headache. Kevin really thought this was gonna be his final delivery, but somehow he made it out. Dude was seriously regretting getting mixed up in all this and swore he wouldn't pull a stunt like that again. Then Kevin spotted Mount Songju and figured the dungeon must have disappeared after the boss got clapped. Sure, people could fight dungeon bosses, but you needed a pass to get in. And those passes were only handed out to vetted hunters. Kevin definitely wasn't one of them. So now he was low-key stressing about whether this was going to come back to bite him. But then he remembered why he risked his life in the first place. The Monkey King's package. Dude was mad as hell when Sun Wukong said he thought Kevin would have handled it faster. Seeing Kevin ready to throw hands, the Monkey King told him to chill and spill the whole story. So the courier started telling him about how a pile of scrap metal turned out to be a golem that nearly offed him. Sun Wukong was shook. No way the boss should have gone berserk like that. It doesn't even move unless provoked. That's when Kevin connected the dots. Every messed up thing that happened was because of the Black Dragon Guild. Dude was so mad he wanted to run up on every scumbag in that guild and wreck them. After hearing the courier's whole story, Sun Wukong was sure he hadn't managed to get the box. But Kevin denied it and headed to his moped to grab the box. Handing the box to the Monkey King, Kevin asked what was inside. Suddenly, Sun Wukong pierced the metal box, and boom, a staff fell out. With that staff, the Monkey King finally got his freedom back. Sun Wukong rushed to disappear before the Emperor found out about his escape. But Kevin wasn't about to let him bounce. Not because he was running, but because he hadn't paid up yet. No way the Monkey King was scamming him. Dude was basically on God-tier level. He had already paid Kevin, plus threw in a little bonus for the efforts. But when Kevin peeked inside the pouch, he was straight up confused. What even was this? Back in his apartment, eating ramen, he caught the breaking news. Turned out, reports had dropped saying the Black Dragon Guild had cleared Mount Huago the day before. And they even interviewed the guy Kevin had saved. The hunter spilled the tea. Nobody told them they'd be fighting a boss. Then he straight up said the guild didn't kill the boss. The real hero was some unknown dude who saved him. Kevin thought he was finished, but somehow, he'd not only saved lives, he'd stayed anonymous. Though what really mattered to him was the paycheck. He just cashed in 70 grand for this delivery. He also got a bonus, but at first he had no clue what it was for. Turns out it was Sun Wukong's hair strands, which could summon his clone. Lately, Kevin had been walking a fine line, so having a Monkey King clone on standby wasn't a bad deal. Out of nowhere, a new delivery request popped up. Looked like he had more work to do today. Meanwhile, Richard, the leader of the Yunwan Guild, rushed to the hospital to check on Andrew as soon as he could. He felt responsible for the hunter getting hurt. Underestimating the Black Dragon Guild was a big mistake. Trying to crack a joke, Andrew said his hunting career might be over because of his injuries. But he quickly admitted he'd bounce back fast, and that the fracture wasn't that big of a deal. Richard, though, was ready to retire him on the spot for that kind of joke. Then Andrew spilled the tea. The dude on the scooter was the one who took down the boss. The guild members were still hunting for him, but even after combing through the whole area, they came up empty. This time, Kevin had another job lined up for Hephaestus. Walking into the mansion, he saw the guy was busy, so he figured he'd wait it out. Out of nowhere, he started feeling sleepy, like a warm, cozy vibe, as if he was wrapped up in his mom's arms again. But turns out, he wasn't hugging his mom. He was hugging Hephaestus. and the god gave him a heads up. This delivery was going to be a long one. Kevin just shrugged and said that for the right price, he'd ride across the whole damn planet. The man handed him a cane made of celestial steel, the same one Kevin had snagged earlier. Then he told him to get a move on. This job had to be done today. His destination? An Egyptian pyramid. Apparently, Hephaestus had customers outside of Olympus too. Hephaestus warned him that the client was picky as hell, so he figured Kevin could use a little backup. And just like that, a blue-haired girl named Lucio popped up, his so-called assistant. Turned out, Kevin had been stressing for nothing. The pyramid wasn't actually in Egypt, but in some mythical realm. This delivery would have been a breeze, if not for the loudmouth tagging along behind him. Lucio was straight up pissed. She thought she'd be helping Hephaestus, not cruising through the clouds on a moped. The second they met, she made it clear. Kevin better not look down on her. Hephaestus said she'd be useful, but so far Kevin wasn't seeing it. All she did was yap and complain, and it was driving him up the wall. He straight up told her he'd ditch her with the package if she didn't stop distracting him. Lucio cared about her rep. She'd graduated high school early and was studying at some elite university. She had worked her way up to elite nymph status and wasn't about to let some dumb delivery mess with her reputation. Kevin was so done with her nonstop chatter that when she opened her mouth, he just tossed a candy in. He told her she'd get another one if she kept quiet and didn't make a scene. Lucio absolutely loved the candy, felt like angels were dancing on her tongue. So, the nymph finally agreed to shut up and Kevin kept his word, handing her another piece. But there was one tiny problem with Lucio's silence. She couldn't warn Kevin about the danger ahead. He was pissed, but she just shrugged and reminded him that he was the one who told her to stay quiet. Now, standing in front of them was a talking sphinx, ready to let them pass if they solved its riddle. Everyone knew this monster hit travelers with a puzzle the moment they got too close. And if you got it wrong, well, the Sphinx didn't do second chances. It straight up swallowed people whole. Kevin had a bad feeling that brute force wouldn't work here, which meant he was one wrong answer away from getting wrecked. But there was no other choice. He had to at least try solving the damn riddle. He figured if it was the classic riddle, he'd be fine. No way he could mess that up. But just in case things went south, he had Sun Wukong's hair strand ready. And of course, luck wasn't on his side. The Sphinx hit him with a riddle he didn't know. What sound does a duck make when it falls? No clue, not even a guess. Lucio was a pro at solving riddles, but even she was completely stumped. They had 3 minutes to figure it out, and their minds were coming up blank. Lucio once had a professor who warned her that the Sphinx's riddle was impossible to solve. He claimed even the dean wouldn't be able to crack it, which only made the nymph even more desperate. Realizing they had zero chance of figuring it out, Kevin just blurted out, "Quack, ouch!" Lucio instantly went off on him for wasting their one shot on such a dumb answer. But to their absolute shock, that ridiculous answer was actually correct. The Sphinx let them pass, but Kevin suggested it come up with something smarter next time. He gunned the moped, and before long, they reached a canyon they'd have to cross. Out of nowhere, Lucio decided to apologize for not helping and just judging him for being human. Kevin just waved it off, saying he'd heard way worse on his last job. Honestly, he felt like he was babysitting his younger cousin, so her words didn't even faze him. Eventually, they reached their destination. No guards in sight, just a bell to call one. The moment Kevin rang it, something insane happened. Gravity magic flared up around them. Suddenly, the ground beneath them vanished, and they started free-falling straight down. When they finally hit bottom, they were stunned they hadn't been completely wiped out by the fall. Shaking it off, Kevin and Lucio wandered through the long corridors, using a flashlight to light the way. Kevin was starting to feel less like a delivery guy and more like he was running some kind of dungeon quest. Out of the blue, Lucio spotted something weird on the wall and told Kevin to shine the light on it. Turned out to be a series of frescoes, and they seriously freaked Lucio out. She had heard of a cruel goddess who loved kidnapping and torturing nymphs. Lucio guessed these frescoes were made by her ancestors to preserve their history. She figured they might hold evidence of the horrors committed against nymphs. But Kevin didn't see anything dark in the paintings. They just looked festive to him. Lucio, however, was dead set on revenge. She was ready to make their ancestors' suffering right. Kevin immediately shut that idea down. Whoever lived in this pyramid, first and foremost, was their client. Just as they were talking about revenge, the goddess herself appeared before them. Ignoring Kevin's warning, Lucio boldly declared that she was here to avenge her people. But instead of getting mad, the goddess pulled her into a tight hug upon realizing she was a nymph. Kevin was straight up stunned. Not only did the goddess not kill Lucio, but she was actually fawning over her. Apparently, she used to throw events for nymphs, but hugged them so tightly they literally suffocated. She just thought they were too cute and couldn't stop herself. Now Kevin finally got what kind of torture Lucio had been talking about. The goddess introduced herself as the high priestess of all Egyptian temples. Her name was Pharaoh. But Kevin and Lucio weren't even listening. They were too busy bickering again. Once they finally chilled out, Kevin said he had heard her, but as far as he knew, only kings were called pharaohs. That's when Lucio started explaining that gods weren't just born. Some, like Pharaoh, became gods. Kevin got straight to the point, telling the woman they were just here to deliver a package. But Pharaoh already knew. She admitted she had been watching them the whole time through her crystal ball. When she finally received her staff, Pharaoh was beyond thrilled. The craftsmanship was absolutely flawless. She even praised the courier, saying he completely lived up to his reputation. Hearing that, Kevin immediately figured there had to be a fat payday coming his way. He started buttering up the goddess, which Lucio instantly judged him for, calling his behavior disgraceful. But the moment Lucio found out the candy she loved so much cost money, she joined right in. Kevin ended up getting a whopping 50,000 coins for the delivery, making him even richer. Meanwhile, Lucio demanded her fair share, more of those delicious candies. Before they left, Pharaoh suggested they use the main entrance, which they hadn't even known existed. Before long, Kevin and Lucio arrived at Hephaestus's estate, with Lucio so exhausted she passed out on the way. Kevin never thought he'd actually become friends with Lucio through this job, but somehow it happened. They'd grown close, but now that the mission was over, they both knew. It was time to say goodbye. However, when Hephaestus offered them a chance to officially team up, they both refused immediately. Kevin's morning started off weird. He woke up to Lucio calling his name. Still half asleep, he let out a yell, completely confused about why the nymph was even in his house. Then it hit him. He hadn't actually turned down Hephaestus, which meant he and Lucio were officially a team. She had woken him up because his phone had been blowing up with delivery requests. Before Kevin knew it, an entire week had flown by, and his orders were back to normal. Suddenly, his boss called, chewing him out for still slacking on deliveries. But the moment Kevin heard threats of being fired, he snapped and quit on the spot. Finally free from his miserable job, Kevin and Lucio went off to grab a meal. Meanwhile, the Yanwan Guild was still searching for Kevin, with zero success. Steve, the captain of one of their squads, suspected Kevin had figured out they were tracking him. Richard ultimately decided to call off the search. It was draining way too many resources. But this wasn't their only failure. Their squad sent to raid Busan had retreated. It looked like in just 5 days, the portal there would become a fully fledged dungeon. That portal had first appeared a month ago on Hyundai Beach. Richard immediately knew clearing it wouldn't be easy. But he was confident 6 high-ranking hunters could handle it. Now Richard was planning to personally join the raid alongside Agatha and their squad. Meanwhile, Kevin and Lucio were already digging in at a cafe. Lucio had never imagined human food could taste this good. As they left the cafe, Lucio felt like she was about to explode. She had definitely eaten way too much. Kevin scolded her for it, reminding her that he had warned her, and suddenly he felt like her dad. Since they were going to be living together now, Kevin decided to look for a bigger apartment. He had clearly underestimated himself. With his money, he could afford luxury. They started checking out apartments. The first one was great, but Kevin wanted to see more. But as they stepped out of the building, Kevin spotted someone familiar, Agatha. He was thrilled. He had managed to buy an apartment on the first day of searching. After spending the entire day hunting for places, he still ended up picking the very first one. But something still bugged him. Agatha. He had seen her yesterday, and in the dungeon. He also couldn't understand why he hadn't gotten any delivery requests for 2 days now. He had plenty of money, but after buying the apartment, his budget had shrunk significantly. All of it had gone into the place. And if the orders didn't pick up soon, Lucio might run out of candy. That just couldn't happen, so the nymph immediately started brainstorming a plan. Then an idea hit her. Why not ask Hephaestus if anyone needed a delivery? Kevin loved the idea, calling Lucio a genius, and they got ready to set out. The only issue? How to get there. Usually Kevin was teleported automatically. Meanwhile, 45 Yanwan Guild hunters were preparing to raid Hyundai Beach. On the way to the portal, Agatha told Richard she had seen Kevin, right by her house. They had searched everywhere for him, and yet he had been right under Agatha's nose. Richard was sure they could track him down now. When Kevin and Lucio arrived at Hephaestus's estate, they noticed something odd. The lights were out. Lucio insisted they leave immediately. Entering uninvited could get them punished. But Kevin didn't listen, and soon enough, Hephaestus himself stepped out to greet them. Kevin explained that they had come with a request, bringing along some beer as a peace offering. Hephaestus said he did know someone who needed a delivery, but it could be dangerous. Kevin didn't care. In their situation, they had to take any opportunity. The moment they teleported, Kevin realized something dangerous was heading straight for him. The monster would have killed him if someone hadn't struck it down at the last second. Suddenly, Lucio appeared from the bushes. She had been teleported with him, and right behind her was the one who had actually slain the beast. A centaur. Chiron. Kevin got a notification. Arrival at the client's location confirmed. That meant Chiron was the client. As Lucio explained who Chiron was, she casually mentioned Hercules, which sent the centaur into a rage. It took some effort, but Kevin and Lucio finally managed to explain who they were. But Chiron still couldn't understand why Hephaestus would send a human and a nymph to him. After thinking it over, Chiron decided to trust them, a relief for both of them. He assigned them a task: venture through the forest, enter a cave, and collect the drool of a sleeping brute. Kevin wasn't thrilled about it, but arguing with Chiron didn't seem like an option. What he didn't ask about was the dangers ahead, and there were a lot. Chiron had planned to make them struggle from the very start, but he didn't know about Kevin's special suit. With it, Kevin and Lucio reached the cave entrance in seconds. They immediately started searching, but even after venturing deep inside, they found nothing. Until, by accident, they finally stumbled upon a massive Hydra, multiple heads and all. Chiron had thought Kevin would chicken out and refuse the mission, but he was wrong. Convinced Kevin would give up, he had sent them to a cave full of immortal monsters. Luckily, they arrived while the beast was still sleeping, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. Just as Kevin thought this would be way easier with an invisibility helmet, he got a notification. He had access to the warp service, which let him instantly retrieve items he had purchased before. The service wasn't cheap, 5,000 coins, but Kevin didn't have time to be picky. With the helmet in hand, Kevin got ready to sneak up to the sleeping Hydra and collect its drool. Lucio tried to stop him, but her efforts were in vain. She had no choice but to head for the exit. Once she was finally gone, the courier could safely collect the monster's drool. Suddenly, an earthquake shook the cave, shattering the jar containing the precious liquid. But something far worse happened. The enormous Hydra woke up. Kevin assumed that as long as he wore the helmet, the Hydra wouldn't notice him. He was wrong. The monster had picked up his human scent. The Hydra demanded to know why he was there, but Kevin knew that telling the truth would mean instant death. Thinking fast, he lied. He claimed Cerberus had sent him to say hello since he hadn't been able to reach her. The Hydra was surprised. Cerberus had never before shown any interest in how his older sister was doing. Meanwhile, Lucio, now outside the cave, rushed to call Chiron for help. Chiron knew even he couldn't defeat the Hydra, but he couldn't let Kevin die because of him. It turned out that the Hydra had once been a woman, forever sealed in her monstrous form, a fact even her brother didn't know. She worried about her brother, so Kevin, unsure what else to do, assured her that Cerberus was doing great. Kevin was about to leave, but the Hydra refused to let him go empty-handed. She allowed him to take a single scale from her back, one that held immense power. Though hesitant, Kevin accepted the scale, realizing how useful it could be. Just as he did, Chiron and a terrified Lucio burst into the cave. Chiron was shocked. He thought Kevin had defeated the Hydra and assumed Hephaestus had sent him a monster. But then the Hydra turned her attention to Chiron. She recognized him. After all, she had once poisoned him. Immortality had been a curse for Chiron, which was why Zeus had granted him a place among the stars instead. That was how the wise centaur's life ended. He was reborn as the constellation Sagittarius. And it all started when Hercules accidentally shot him with an arrow coated in Hydra venom. Now Chiron was desperate to obtain the Hydra's drool. It was the only antidote. The Hydra had known this from the very beginning. She had waited for this moment, and so she immediately gave him the antidote. Chiron had endured centuries of suffering, but the moment he drank it, his body began to heal. Back at Chiron's hut, Kevin impatiently waited for his payment. But Lucio had a bad feeling. What if there wasn't going to be a reward? After all, the Hydra had given Chiron the antidote for free. Soon Chiron emerged, not empty-handed. He handed Kevin a bow. Suddenly, an unexpected guest arrived. Ares, the god of war, son of Zeus and Hera. But he wasn't looking for Chiron. He was looking for Kevin. And the moment he saw him, he fell to his knees, begging for help. Kevin had barely gotten any sleep last night, and now he and Lucio were about to embark on yet another delivery. But all his exhaustion vanished the second he saw his balance. Karan had just deposited 100,000 coins into his account. Bankruptcy was no longer a concern, but now he had a new reason to worry. He and Lucio had exactly 5 hours to save Ares' hunter, the one he was pleading for in Karan's hut. Ares had learned that his chosen hunter was destined to die that day. The god couldn't save him himself. It was forbidden. That meant Kevin was his only hope. Constellations could invest points in hunters, and Ares had invested a lot into this one. When hunters performed great feats, their constellations earned far more than they had initially invested. But if a hunter died, their constellation lost everything, which was exactly what was about to happen to Ares. Kevin had no idea how they were supposed to pull this off, but the thought of massive tips kept him motivated. And so, they set off for Busan, where the Yanwan Guild was currently clearing a dungeon. After finally defeating all the monsters, the hunters reached their final challenge, the boss room. But when they entered, they quickly realized the room was empty. Agatha barely had time to shout for everyone to run before she was attacked. The monster's tentacles lashed out at the hunters. They had walked right into a trap. Meanwhile, Kevin and Lucio had just arrived at the dungeon portal, where the Yanwan Guild was battling for survival. Their target, the hunter Ares needed them to save, was fighting inside. The dungeon was far more dangerous than the last, so to calm an angry Lucio, Kevin handed her some money for candy. With the nymph successfully bribed, Kevin entered the handy dungeon alone. The whole road was packed with monster bodies, making it hella tough for the courier to move. Just then, a system notification popped up suggesting Kevin hit up the local store. Kevin wasn't down to buy a pricey scooter, but when Lucio freaked him out, he ended up buying it by accident. The nymph was hardcore. She'd been trailing the courier from the start because she wanted to roll with him. But that accidental scooter purchase? Top-tier stuff. When the partners spotted monsters in the distance, they jumped on it and took off to get away from those freaks. The Yanwan Guild wasn't doing too hot. The monster attacked everyone except Richard. The leader knew he had to avoid the trap and save everyone, but the monster wasn't giving him a shot. The monster took up the whole ceiling, and some of the monsters could crawl into people's bodies. It was clear that if the monster got out, it'd be total chaos. Soon Agatha got out of the boss trap, and now she and the leader had to free the rest. They started attacking, and Richard used a skill that no monster survived. The guild leader was confident it'd work, but he messed up. Turns out the monster was still alive. Richard and Agatha were about to lose all hope of winning when suddenly Kevin showed up. They instantly recognized him as the courier they'd been looking for. One of the hunters who'd been attacked was about to jump on Lucio, but Kevin stopped him just in time. Then the guy noticed the giant boss from the handy gates and realized they'd shown up just in time. Realizing Richard was the hunter Ares had been after, Kevin got worried, wondering if he was hurt. But the leader wasn't having any of that talk. He thought Kevin's main job was to take down the monster. Kevin didn't get why he was the one who had to do it. Monster hunting was the hunter's job. Agatha thought the courier was going to sacrifice them, hearing that. But the guy quickly explained that Richard was the one who had to fight, and he'd brought him some gear for that. Suddenly, the great Ares sword appeared in front of Richard, a weapon capable of ending wars. After handing over the sword, the courier dipped, leaving the guy with a ton of questions. Before he left, he just said his name was the Messenger of Gods, then he and Lucio bounced. After Kevin left, Richard had no choice but to use the sword. Using Ares' sword, Richard managed to break through the cave ceiling and take down the monster. The next day, all the news was about the Yanwan Guild sealing the Hyundai gates. But Richard couldn't believe the courier they'd seen a while ago was the same guy from yesterday. His thoughts were interrupted when Andrew showed up at his hospital room. The hunter was surprised by the new sword the leader had, but even more shocked when he found out who gave it to him. Richard told Andrew to find out where the courier lived so they could recruit him into their guild. Meanwhile, Kevin and Lucio rolled up to the Temple of Ares to report the delivery was done. When Ares heard the mission was a success, he decided to reward Kevin. He handed Kevin a box, claiming it contained one of his father's most cherished treasures. But both Kevin and Ares were stunned when they opened it to find a plain old club. The next morning, Kevin noticed an ad for the National Hunter exam. He got the idea to test his skills since he didn't want to keep hiding who he really was. After getting back from the store, the courier suddenly got an order from Hephaestus. News had already spread about how fast and efficient the guy was with deliveries, reaching even Hephaestus. But this time, the delivery wasn't for him. It was for the guy who had freaked Lucio out. That guy was Jason, the head of the top transport company in Olympus and leader of the Argonauts. The Argonauts were the legendary travelers who sailed on the Argo ship and became heroes of Hellas. Jason's service was having a problem. They couldn't transport goods because of sirens on the route. Orpheus had handled it before, but now he was on a concert tour. So now Jason was asking Kevin, a regular courier, to deal with them, which Kevin didn't get. But when Kevin saw the reward for the task, he changed his mind. The reward was way too good to pass up. He figured it'd be tough to handle the sirens alone, so Hephaestus decided to show him what he was made of. The sirens lived in the Singing Cliffs, so Kevin called up his scooter and headed there with Lucio. These monsters were expert underwater attackers, so the mission was pretty dangerous. The mermaid was about to attack them, but Kevin smacked her with Ares' club, which turned out to be just a regular stick. Thanks to the invisibility helmet, they managed to hide, but now a bunch of mermaids were actively hunting them. Once the mermaids dipped, Kevin and Lucio decided to try sneaking into the temple and taking out the queen. Since the club was useless, Kevin bought a Zeus ball lightning as his weapon. Walking into the temple, they found mermaids casually chatting with the queen about attacking their victims. They were planning to hit Jason's ship, and Kevin and Lucio couldn't let that slide. Kevin came up with a plan, and Lucio agreed to help him out for some chachjang spaghetti. Taking off the helmet, the guy started teasing them, and when they chased after him, Lucio zapped them with Zeus lightning. The weapon was way too powerful and ended up wiping out not just the queen, but all the mermaids in the temple. But their reward for killing the queen still hadn't shown up, and soon they found out she was alive. The queen tried to attack Lucio, but Kevin saved her using his suit. But soon a mermaid dragged Kevin down to the depths, trying to drown him. But Kevin wasn't about to give up. He called his club back and hit the queen with it. This time it actually worked because he could transfer power to it. Smacking the mermaid a few more times, the courier managed to escape, surface, and finish their mission. The guy kept his word and took Lucio to eat chachjang spaghetti, because without her, they wouldn't have made it. Kevin planned to relax at home, but an uninvited guest decided to show up. Kevin thought it was some dealer, but turns out it was his old buddy Richard. Richard came to invite Kevin to join his guild, offering him crazy amounts of cash. But Kevin had other plans. He wasn't about to join a guild, no matter how much money they threw at him. Even though Kevin wanted to chill, he got an order, and now they were climbing a mountain. Usually he'd pop up right in front of the client, but this time they teleported him to the base of the mountain. The guild offer was tempting, but Kevin still thought it was hunter work. Reaching the mountaintop, he found not the client, but just a monster from the Heian gates. Suddenly the ground shook, and Kevin quickly realized the monster near them wasn't dead. A huge explosion went off, and right in front of them appeared a real Olympic hero, Hercules. Kevin immediately remembered that he was the one who poisoned Kieran with a poison arrow. Hercules told the team that monsters with tentacles had been slipping through the passage often. The guy figured someone from outside might be trying to invade. Kevin and Lucio's job was to figure out the real reason monsters were popping up on Olympus. Not wanting to piss off Hercules, Kevin agreed to take on the task, earning praise from the client. For Hercules, Kevin turned out to be just like his wife Hebe, his first client. Looking at his route, Kevin thought there was a mistake since there was a cliff in that direction. But Hercules said there was no mistake and sent them both down the cliff. Richard gave Andrew the bad news that the courier wasn't interested in joining their guild. But Richard had a new plan: hire Kevin to deliver Ares' sword. The sword had been a backup for a while, but soon it wasn't needed by the leader, so he sold it at auction. Recently, there'd been a problem with serial thefts in guild trade, and since the sword was super valuable, Kevin's help came just in time. As they fell, Kevin realized they were going to crash, so he called his scooter. After mentioning Hercules' name, the ground shook under them, and a giant appeared out of nowhere. Hearing about Kevin and Lucio's mission, the giant laughed, and they realized he was definitely involved. Even though the giant, Atlas, had beef with Hercules, he claimed he wasn't connected to the monsters. But Kevin knew he had to talk the god down, or he'd be in for some serious heavenly punishment. For info about the monsters, Atlas demanded they bring him a golden apple. But Kevin had to do it without crossing the Styx River. Only then would Atlas agree to help. The nymph tried to convince Kevin not to go for it, saying it was impossible, but the guy didn't listen. The courier remembered he'd seen a golden apple in the App Store, so he quickly bought it. Returning to Hercules, the guy told him that after hearing the necessary info, he ran off with the apple. Hercules had long known that Kevin was no ordinary guy. He reminded him of himself when he was younger. But Atlas still didn't give a clear reason for the monster's appearance. He just kept riddling them. Atlas explained that the monsters came from a place divided into 7 branches, all with blue flames everywhere. Hercules realized the monsters were coming from another world, but he never imagined they were from there. He couldn't understand why the 3 Furies, the Erinyes, had dumped such a tough job on a regular guy. When the partners left, Hermes arrived to see Hercules. Hermes was surprised that the god was still feuding with his brother and grandfather, Ares and Atlas. They both instantly figured out Atlas' riddle, and now they needed to gear up. Soon Hermes flew off to do his job, reporting the latest news to the temple. Early in the morning, Kevin woke Lucio up since they had to rush to the hunter exam. When they got there, they were shocked by the number of people. The host announced the start of the hunter exam and then invited the first contestant to begin the trial. The monsters were weak, and Kevin realized that the key wasn't just beating them, but doing it the right way. Soon it was Kevin's turn. He planned to use his mech suit to take down the monster. However, he didn't know that the leader of the Black Dragon Guild, who he knew, would be on the jury. Amanda hadn't planned on being there either, but her guild had lost a lot of sponsors due to scandals. Now she was at the hunter exam to find worthy fighters for her guild. She didn't recognize Kevin, but seeing his agility, she decided he was exactly what she was looking for. His result was the 3rd best in history, and he didn't even think becoming a hunter would be this easy. As the guy and the nymph were heading out, Amanda stopped them, and Kevin immediately recognized her. When she offered him a spot in her guild, he flat out refused, since he wasn't interested. But Amanda valued every talented hunter, so she was ready to lure him in by any means necessary. She offered him 5 billion won for a contract, but that amount seemed laughable to Kevin. Amanda was stunned when she heard the Yonwan Guild offered him 20 billion. Not even an hour after the exam, while sitting in a cafe, Kevin saw news about himself being discussed. He placed his order, and it came instantly. But it wasn't a regular waiter who brought it. It was Richard. This time, though, Richard didn't come to invite Kevin to the guild. He came to make a delivery order. Richard explained that they needed to deliver an order to Japan, but a thief was blocking their way. Hearing that Richard was ready to pay him 20 billion won for the delivery, Kevin immediately agreed. The courier and the nymph ended up on a massive cargo ship owned by the Yonwan Guild. Kevin thought he'd be delivering the order, but it seemed like he was just supposed to accompany it. Thanks to the guild's VIP card, he not only got on board, but also unlocked the container with the order. Inside, he found a powerful sword locked behind several locks. Lucio didn't understand why the sword was there. It was the famous sword of Charlemagne, Durandal. They had to keep their eyes peeled as no one could even think about stealing the sword. 20 billion won was at stake. Due to the sleep gas, everyone on board passed out, and during this time, a thief snuck onto the ship. Kevin also fell asleep, but Lucio woke him up just in time, as the thief was already nearby. Using Arachne's divine rope, Kevin quickly tied her up. The girl tried to convince them to give her the sword, but soon realized they wouldn't do that. She then revealed that Hermes had sent her for the sword to counter the looming threat. Realizing she had already said too much, the girl used a powerful smoke grenade. While Kevin lost focus, the thief, Selena, managed to escape from the rope. Once back, Selena told Hermes that despite the trouble, she had stolen the necessary ring. This ring was part of the story of King Arthur, and they needed to give it back to its first owner. Selena mentioned the issue on the ship, but Hermes just said that it was all part of the plan. Despite the stolen ring, Kevin's job was to deliver Durandal, and he succeeded at that. After receiving payment, Kevin and Lucio decided to visit Hephaestus, but he wasn't alone there. Freya, the chief goddess of the Norse gods and leader of the Valkyries, was with the blacksmith. Kevin thought the god was cheating on Aphrodite, but it turned out that Freya wanted Kevin to make a delivery. She needed him to deliver a letter to Hel, the ruler of Helheim, the world of the dead. The mission was extremely dangerous, and both Lucio and Hephaestus were sure Kevin wouldn't take it on. But even though Kevin could afford not to work, he couldn't resist the extra money. Soon, Lucio and Kevin were riding on his moped down the eerie roads of the underworld. People who died naturally or from illness ended up in Helheim. There was also Valhalla, which resembled paradise, where warriors who died in battle were sent. But as they crossed the bridge to the land of the dead, Kevin and Lucio suddenly started feeling ill. A resident of Helheim caught the scent of Kevin, but thought he had died earlier. Lucio then guessed that the issue was with deliveries to Tartarus, another underworld. It turned out the resident was guarding the bridge, and Lucio immediately realized they were facing Mistress Modgood. Hearing that they were carrying a letter from Mistress Freya, Mistress Modgood immediately allowed them to cross the bridge. As they approached Hell, it became clear it was from Norse mythology, as it was freezing cold. Suddenly, Lucio remembered that in order to survive the cold of Helheim, you had to be a frost giant. Not wanting to freeze to death, Kevin had to stop by a delivery app shop. There he found something to help them warm up, down jackets made from wolf pelts. However, as soon as one problem was solved, another appeared, a fierce blizzard. The wind made Kevin's moped barely move forward, and the navigator wasn't working either. Realizing they were getting nowhere, they decided to take a break to warm up Kevin's phone. Suddenly, a half-naked man came running toward them, fleeing from a pack of wolves. Jumping on the moped, Kevin and Lucio sped off, but the man caught up with them. Since the moment the man had arrived there, he hadn't seen any humans, and he was glad to meet the duo. Running for his life from the wolves, Kevin and Lucio spotted what seemed like their salvation, a hut. The man jumped over a 7-meter wall and finally introduced himself as Sigurd. Sigurd was a descendant of the greatest man in the world, the king of the gods, Odin. Lucio immediately recognized him as the hero from the saga of the Volsungs, who had slain the evil dragon Fafnir. Though the hut wasn't theirs, they had to hide from the wolves and wait out the blizzard. After explaining the reason for their visit to Helheim, the duo wondered why the man had been running from wolves. Sigurd was a dragon slayer, but the wolves there were already dead, so there was no point in fighting them. Kevin explained that they had to deliver a letter from Freya, and Sigurd agreed to help them. Just then, the wolves ran toward them, and the warrior told them to go ahead, as he could handle the wolves on his own. He had the Gram sword, with which Sigurd had once slain the dragon Fafnir. However, it was impossible to kill the wolves, as they resurrected every time. The dragon slayer told the courier and the nymph to escape, but Kevin couldn't leave him behind. Summoning a club, Kevin began attacking the wolves and eventually managed to destroy them for good. Sigurd couldn't believe that someone could be killed in Helheim, let alone with a club. Suddenly, Lucio remembered the value of the club. It was a weapon capable of killing even immortals. Joyfully jumping back on the moped, Kevin quickly took them toward their destination. But when they reached the Tower of Helheim, they found that Sigurd had been following them all along. Going there alone was too dangerous, and it wasn't easy to enter. There were guards at the entrance. But hearing from Sigurd that Kevin and Lucio could be let through, the guards immediately allowed them in. The guards, Garm, listened to the man, as he was their general. A servant of Mistress Hel, Genglo, met them and led them straight to the recipient of the letter. Mistress Hel asked if the letter spoke the truth, but Kevin said he had no idea. Hel was impressed by Kevin's confidence and decided to tell him the contents of the letter. Someone seemed to be dressing up as the dead of Helheim to gain entry to Valhalla. Only those from one specific place in the world could do this, the place Atlas had mentioned. Now that it was known they existed, Hel was planning to head straight to the center of the events. Returning to Hephaestus, the duo shared the strange prophecy with him and Freya. They were visibly shaken, their eyes filled with fear, and Kevin and Lucio couldn't understand why. Realizing the seriousness of the problem, Freya hurried to leave, paying Kevin for the delivery before she left. After she departed, Kevin decided to ask Hephaestus about the place where the land was divided into 7 parts. Hephaestus was surprised that Kevin had already heard about it from Hercules, and was also angry as he hadn't mentioned it to him. The blacksmith understood that sooner or later, the meeting of the gods would happen, and it was to blame for it all. The meeting of the gods was a gathering of the 12 Olympian gods, where they discussed heavenly plans. However, Hephaestus wasn't planning on telling Kevin the story, as it could cause problems. Eventually, Kevin would face it himself and learn everything, whether he wanted to or not. Finally, Kevin and Lucio could settle into their new home, as the previous tenants had already moved out. But suddenly, Kevin heard a doorbell, and there stood Agatha waiting for him. She brought Kevin a rice cake to celebrate his new home, as she was his new neighbor. Hungry, Lucio snatched the cake, but after tasting it, she found the flavor absolutely disgusting. The cake had a mint and chocolate flavor, which, while very unusual, was something Agatha enjoyed. Agatha explained her visit, saying that Richard wanted to assign Kevin an investigation task. Soon, the girl took the duo to the Yan Wan Guild building, where their leader was waiting for them. Richard explained that the difficulty of the dungeons had increased, and there was a risk of monsters entering their world. Kevin's task was to go into the dungeon and study a monster. The monster he needed to study was the Red Dragon, the highest level monster in South Korea. Kevin didn't understand why he was being assigned this task, as even the strongest hunters wouldn't be able to handle it. The guild promised to take care of the smaller details, while Kevin only needed to study 2 monsters. The second monster was the Lizardman King, located near the Red Dragon. Kevin was about to argue, but once he found out how much he would be paid, he immediately agreed. Although he hadn't planned to go into the dungeon, Kevin soon found himself at the non-sand gates. Hephaestus helped him prepare for the delivery better by casting a spell on his moped, making it incredibly durable. Thanks to Hephaestus's tuning, the moped could drive through swamps without getting stuck. After crossing the swamp, they saw a huge palace ahead, where they were supposed to find the Lizard Man. A problem arose with the palace guards, but Kevin decided to simply bypass them using his invisibility skill. This time, fighting wasn't necessary, as his task was just to study the king. Kevin and Lucio thought they were safe, but it turned out they weren't. The Lizardman guards were preparing to attack. However, when Kevin showed them that their king had sent him on a mission, the guards immediately stopped. It was strange that the order came from a monster, but Kevin saw this as an even bigger opportunity. Suddenly, the king appeared before them, and Kevin pictured him very differently. The king explained that a disaster had once befallen their kingdom. A cruel invader had wiped out everyone. Now he wanted Kevin to defeat the invader in exchange for all the treasures of their kingdom. Hearing such a large reward, Kevin immediately agreed to take on the task. The king decided to show Kevin the treasure room to give him a preview of his future reward. However, they discovered Selena, the thief of Hermes, who was immediately captured by the king's guards. The girl was hoping for Kevin's support, thinking he knew what Hermes had planned and why Selena had been sent there. But that wasn't the case. Kevin had no idea what the god had planned or why he sent Selena. Selena then swore on the river Styx and promised to do anything Kevin asked if he saved her. Kevin agreed and asked Lucio, who could speak with the Lizardmen, to tell them that Selena was their colleague. Seeing that there were only 3 hours left to kill the invader, they hurried on their way. On the road, they met Selena and thought she wanted something from them, but the thief actually wanted to help. The girl told them that the monster they needed to kill was the Red Dragon. Kevin was supposed to study it, and he knew that the Red Dragon was a high-level monster. Suddenly, Selena claimed she could show them a shortcut and help with killing the monster. Kevin didn't understand how she could help, being just a thief, but thieves had their own tricks. Soon they arrived at the Red Dragon, and Kevin activated his super jump to attack it. Selena couldn't understand how Kevin could be so strong without even having worked as a hunter for a year. The invisibility helmet was very helpful in battle, as it prevented the monster from attacking him properly. The strength of his suit allowed him to deliver incredibly powerful blows, but the time to use it was limited. Summoning his club, Kevin got stuck in place for a moment, allowing the monster to attack. Selena noticed that Kevin's attacks were getting weaker, so she planned to help him. However, Lucio stopped the girl, convincing her that Kevin would win the battle on his own. Suddenly, Kevin discovered the monster's weak spot, which he was about to strike with a magic sword. But when he did, the dragon burst into flames, making it impossible for Kevin to get close. At that moment, Selena rushed to help Kevin as the boss entered its second phase. The thief had an ice potion, which she used to freeze the monster. However, after a couple of minutes, the ice from Demeter, cast by Selena, started melting. The monster broke free, and there was no time left to enhance Kevin's suit. While Kevin distracted the dragon, Selena decided to take a risk and use Demeter's potion again. At that moment, Kevin attacked the monster, and he finally managed to defeat it. Richard was shocked when he learned that Kevin had managed to defeat the Red Dragon. The leader thought he was joking until the guild members went to the site and confirmed it. He had no idea how to report this to the association since the monster was way too strong for them. They'd definitely start thinking a stranger took down the monster, and that could be a huge problem. The lizards were super thankful to the guy for protecting their kingdom and gave him a wallet as a reward. But this wasn't just any wallet, it was magical, able to hold big and heavy stuff. Now the gates to non-sane were gone, which saved the lizard people from having their kingdom wiped out. But Selena wasn't going to let herself lose out, so she made sure to get what was owed. After getting the hunter license, Kevin could make more cash, even getting paid for monster corpses. Not long ago, the guy could barely afford more than 2 chicken dinners. But now he could chow down on fancy chicken whenever he wanted. While eating, he got an order, but now the delivery guy could afford to put it off. Meanwhile, an attack was set up on the island of Crete, but they didn't have enough heroes to defend it. Soon enough, the fortress wall got wrecked, and the Minotaur managed to sneak into the ruler's temple. A bit later, Kevin and Lucio arrived at Hephaestus, who was the one making the order. Hephaestus was tense since it had to do with something the god had told the guy to forget in the last conversation. The blacksmith wanted to deal with the problem only with the god's help, but it was way more serious than he thought. Turns out they had roots not only in the god's world, but also in the human one. No one knew if their seeds came down from above, but the gods couldn't do anything about it. Kevin was confused, but when Hephaestus tried to say their name, he couldn't. Apparently, the gods once teamed up to make sure their name stayed secret. But now the important thing was, they were supposed to get offerings from Crete, but they hadn't arrived. They couldn't forget it because of the meeting with the uncle, who'd be pissed if he found out. Kevin needed to find out what happened before his uncle caught wind of it. The guy didn't get why there was such urgency, but Lucio explained it had to do with the Minotaur. Once the queen went after Poseidon's offering, which really pissed him off. Soon, Kevin and Lucio, crossing the sea, finally made it to a place where they could stop. They decided to check out the area, but the guards stopped them, claiming they'd invaded their land. When they heard the partners were heading to Crete, one of the guys got really curious about them. That was Theseus, king of Athens and a hero who once beat the Minotaur and escaped its maze. Turns out Theseus knew the delivery guy, who everyone thought was a newbie hero. He handed the guy a note saying the monster from the Labyrinth on Crete had come back. It turned out Theseus didn't kill the Minotaur. He just locked it up, but now it was free. Kevin hoped he wouldn't have to fight it, but he agreed to help Theseus kill the monster. The hero had beaten it before, but back then, Ariadne, the princess of Crete, helped him. Now Theseus was gathering a crew to get to the island faster and take out the Minotaur. He wanted to go alone, but that was before he heard this from Hercules' messenger. Kevin didn't know what Theseus heard, but he thought it might be what Hephaestus was trying to say. Kevin and Lucio were blown away by the size of the ship they were going to sail on. Suddenly, the guy heard a nymph's voice. It was Lubor's voice, someone Lucio knew. Lubor showed them to their cabin, and soon their ship was pulling up to Crete. The whole island had turned into ruins because of the Minotaur. They rushed to find survivors and found the temple of Poseidon was untouched. Inside, they found some people alive, but King Minos wasn't among them. Suddenly, Theseus was told the Minotaur dragged the king into the labyrinth, where no one could escape. They hurried there, but before entering, they had to tie a string to something. It was a way to get out of the labyrinth, a trick Theseus's ex-girlfriend Ariadne taught him. After walking a bit through the maze, Theseus noticed it was way too stuffy this time. Suddenly, they spotted the same monster with tentacles they'd met before, and Theseus quickly went to take it down. Just as the hero suggested they pull back and come up with a plan, an earthquake hit the labyrinth. The walls of the maze started shifting, instantly separating Kevin and Lucio from Theseus. But Kevin quickly figured out that finding an exit wasn't too hard. He just had to move the walls. The guy doubted Theseus's words because the idea that the Minotaur could escape was total nonsense. Suddenly they heard heavy footsteps, and it became clear the Minotaur was coming for them. Since they were there to catch it, Kevin decided to take the monster down fast. Despite the invisibility helmet, the Minotaur tracked them by the string, so Lucio cut it. They managed to hide from the Minotaur, but then noticed a familiar creature with tentacles on it. It looked like she was running the monster, so to beat it, they needed to yank her out of him. But then the walls started moving, and they found King Minos hanging from the ceiling. That just made things worse, since the invisibility helmet could only hide two of them. Out of nowhere, the system dropped a hint that they needed to save the king, so he decided to roll with it. Lucio was trying to drag the king to safety while Kevin kept the Minotaur busy. The beast was swinging at him like it could see, and Kevin quickly figured out it was the tentacle's eyes doing the trick. Kevin had just planned to distract the monster, but now he had no choice but to kill it. The tentacles were about to pierce Kevin, but right then, Theseus showed up. It looked like the tentacles and the Minotaur had teamed up. Even so, Theseus still wanted to take it down solo for the achievement. Taking out the Minotaur would level Theseus up to god status, which was his main goal. Listening to the hero, Kevin rushed over to King Minos, leaving Theseus to fight the monster. Even without his sword, Theseus didn't back down. His body was his weapon. He thought he'd killed the monster, but nope. It survived even after a hit from Athena's strength. The monster tricked him into thinking it was his ex, Ariadne. Theseus tried to tell himself it was a lie, but in the end, he let the monster get the upper hand. Turns out Kevin hadn't run off. He came back to snag the achievement and become a god. Kevin wiped out the tentacles and saved Theseus. Then they headed straight to King Minos. Even though Theseus wasn't a fan of the king, he agreed that going back to the temple for healing made sense. Long ago, Minos had attacked Athens, where Theseus's ancestors lived. But Theseus was cool with letting it go. Soon enough, Kevin found himself at Hephaestus's place, since he'd gotten the info he needed. Turns out it all started when the king sent offerings to Poseidon, and the tentacles snuck in. Hephaestus was pretty impressed by how Kevin was taking down enemies left and right. Out of nowhere, Hermes showed up, looking for Kevin, because he wanted him to meet the father of the gods. Kevin and Lucio soon made it to Mount Olympus, where Zeus, the big guy, was hanging out. Hermes showed them inside and, as he left, told Kevin to be cooler with Selena. But the delivery guy couldn't figure out how a thief could be cool. His thoughts were cut off by Zeus, who had already heard about Kevin's feats. Zeus called them up to reward them with something to help with the coming disaster. Zeus handed Kevin a glass orb, and Kevin immediately thought about selling or trading it. Kevin wanted power, not some useless trinket. Back home, Kevin decided to eat the orb with the spirit of Zeus, who'd given it to him. The next morning, Kevin and Lucio headed to the aquarium, like the nymph had convinced Kevin to do. All the fish swam towards them, and Lucio told them to chill, but that just made her stand out more. Kevin figured they should bounce, since if Lucio went viral, they'd be in trouble. As they left the aquarium, the nymph spotted the dolphinarium and convinced Kevin to check it out too. But when the show started, there was Selena, the same thief they'd met before. She was introduced as the pride of the dolphinarium, so this was probably her main gig. Selena recognized Kevin too, so it was extra awkward for her to perform. Still, she did the show and it went super well. Just when the performance ended, the dolphinarium started shaking. Trying to leave, Kevin found a portal to the dungeon, and they both got sucked in. Inside, the nymph found a stone with some familiar writing, but it was too messed up to read. Since this artifact was damaged, it was clear they were in danger. But Kevin stayed chill. If they hung out by the gates, the hunters would show up soon. Then they found two civilians about to be forced into captivity by the Tritons. Tritons were basically merman dudes, like Sirens, but these ones weren't singing. Kevin hadn't planned on getting involved, but sitting by and doing nothing wasn't his style. After walking down a small tunnel, Kevin ended up in Atlantis, totally unexpected. Atlantis used to be all shiny, but the gods hated it and wiped it out. The Tritons were wondering who'd broken the stone tablets, so Kevin and Lucio might have a bigger threat on their hands. The Tritons locked up everyone who ended up in the dungeon through the gates. Hearing the Tritons talk, Kevin figured he should calmly explain things. But that was before the hunters showed up. Then it was gonna be a full-on brawl. Before they could talk more, a notification came through about a new job, this time from the ruler of Atlantis. One of the prisoners was Selena, and she already had a plan to break the others free. Soon the partners made it to the king of Atlantis, who asked Kevin to show what was in his bag. When he found out Kevin had a golden apple, the descendant of Atlas didn't get mad. He started bowing to the delivery guy. He did this because Kevin had actually met their ancestor face to face. Just then, Selena showed up and said the hunters and Tritons would meet soon. Meanwhile, Andrew showed up at the dolphinarium, and they told him the gates were as strong as the ones in Hyundai. Since their guild got wiped out there, they had to roll up with reinforcements this time. Andrew told the other hunters to save the people first and only attack once backup arrived. When they hit the dungeon, they found civilians near the Tritons and started attacking. But out of nowhere, the ruler of Atlantis showed up and stopped the fight from happening. The talks between the humans and the Tritons went smoothly, and the hostages were freed. Andrew thanked Kevin for his help, but still couldn't wrap his head around what was going on. The courier guessed they'd run into more monsters along the way. So Selena asked Andrew to send a hunter with psychometry from the guild. Someone had broken the gravestones holding up the barrier, which meant someone wanted to destroy Atlantis. And a psychometric hunter could have helped figure out who did it by checking out the shattered gravestones. Kevin had some worries about whether the one who broke the gravestones was really behind all this. The king told Kevin that recently the Tritons had become uncontrollably aggressive. Before this, the Tritons had heard some eerie singing. Kevin needed to figure out what caused all this. He thought they weren't connected to the gravestones, which meant Atlantis might have more than one enemy. Kevin planned to check out a place to test his theories, while Selena went off to the cave. All the civilians were saved, and reinforcements were getting ready to go into the dungeon. But they didn't get to move, since Andrew came out and told them everything that had happened. 4 gravestones were holding up the dome over Atlantis, but now only one was left. Even the last gravestone was damaged. It got protected right before the attack. They didn't find the culprit, but the Tritons had grabbed part of a tentacle that tried to do this. Everyone said they had no idea what kind of monster this was, but Selena immediately knew Kevin was lying. When the Yanwan Guild entered the dungeon, some lights started coming their way. They were about to attack, but turns out it was Selena and the Tritons coming to meet them. Seeing the tentacle in the Triton's hand, Richard and Agatha instantly realized it was the beast from the Hyundai Gates. Meanwhile, Kevin and Lucio arrived in the area where the aggressive mermaids and Tritons lived. The people in this area looked nothing like the ones they saw in the palace. Even though they were told they'd isolate the troublemakers, Kevin didn't buy it. The one who broke the gravestone could have charmed the Tritons in the palace, but for some reason, they chose the slums. Out of nowhere, weird singing echoed, followed by an explosion. The locals started freaking out and calling for the guards, and Kevin realized the Tritons were heading there. Remembering the king's words about the strange singing, Kevin and Lucio rushed toward where the sound was coming from. Lucio managed to lead them, but the sound was coming from the underground prison. Hiding to avoid getting caught, they watched as the Tritons rushed to the site of the riot. Once inside, they were shocked by how horrible the prison was compared to Earth's. They walked up to the wall where the sound was coming from, and when Kevin touched it, it suddenly moved. It was a secret door, and when they opened it, they found a chained mermaid. Just then, Kevin got a notification saying they'd found the source of the anomaly. It turned out that the woman was the one the ruler of Atlantis had been looking for. Suddenly, Lucio noticed a notebook that told the story of how the mermaid ended up there. The book's owner had found the wounded mermaid, who turned out to be the long-lost younger princess. On the way to the palace, she regained consciousness and started muttering nonsense. When they made it to the palace, the princess had a fit and passed out again. At first, the book's owner wanted to tell the king, but decided to lock her up in a secret room instead. He was scared of the king's reaction, but it only got worse. The princess cut her vocal cords. The girl kept hurting herself, so the book's owner had to chain her up. That's when the mermaids from the poor areas started acting strangely, enchanted by her song. This cursed gift ran in the royal family. The book's owner knew the song was the cause of the mermaids' deaths, but he fell in love with her and couldn't bring himself to kill her. He just started waiting for a hero to expose his sins. The book was kept by the captain of the guards, Flops, who hoped the princess could be freed from her suffering. Feeling guilty, she begged him to kill her, and then, out of nowhere, he got a mission from Flops. If he didn't do it, there'd be a disaster in Atlantis, but Kevin wasn't about to kill the princess. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, a psychometrist named Emmy had arrived. She grabbed the tentacle and started diving into its memories. The tentacle revealed that the gravestones were actually monsters the gods used to kill people. Once all the gravestones were destroyed, the monster would break free and destroy everyone. When the monster started choking Emmy, she woke up in the Atlantis infirmary. She told them everything she'd heard, and Selena had a thought. A long time ago, Atlantis attacked Athens, and that's what sank the city. Wanting to rebel against the gods, they set free a monster called the Kraken. Suddenly, Flops showed up in the infirmary, thinking it was best for the humans to just go home. They knew too much, so the captain of the guard decided it was better to handle it themselves. Even though they didn't agree, Flops ordered everyone to be captured and sent to the gates. The monster broke the last gravestone, and since Kevin didn't kill the princess, boom, disaster struck. Out of nowhere, an earthquake started, and a giant octopus monster appeared above them. The mermaids started panicking, and Kevin was about to dip, but someone stopped him just in time. They had to join forces, because if they didn't beat the Kraken there, it'd end up in their world. Out of nowhere, the one who could help appeared, the younger princess of Atlantis, Ariel. After the Kraken she'd been holding back was released, the girl was able to regain her strength. Their family had the gift of controlling monsters, so Ariel could hold the Kraken off for a while. The courier got a mission to kill the Kraken, and seeing the reward, Kevin decided to test his luck. Kevin bought a replica of the Astropaia, a dangerous spear of Zeus made from lightning. Thanks to a spirit's glass orb, he had immunity to electricity. Since no one else had that, and Selena owed him a favor, he told her to get everyone out of there. No one wanted to leave, but Selena had to keep her promise since she swore on the river Styx. She activated Hermes' power so they could all follow her. Once they left, everything came down to Kevin, and he couldn't afford to lose. Only Lucio didn't listen to anyone and stayed behind, but Kevin didn't argue. No time for that. After making a deal with the princess, Kevin and she started attacking the monster. After another strike, a flash of light lit up everything, and it was clear. The Kraken was dead. But after the fight, Kevin had no energy left. He started sinking, thinking he was about to die. Out of nowhere, Lucio appeared, grabbing his hand and pulling him to safety. Even though Kevin sealed the gates, everyone said the Yan Wan Guild did it. Kevin didn't mind, though. He'd earned some sweet rewards. One of them was a ring of the sea god, passed down through the royal family. The ring could gather moisture from the air and create water wherever. After being away from the academy for a while, Lucio decided to head there for a few days, then go home. But since they were a team and Kevin couldn't let her go alone, he decided to go with her. In the middle of a small forest, Lucio found a fence behind which the nymphs lived. When the nymphs saw a human, they freaked out. But once they saw Lucio, they opened the gate. The nymphs ran up to hug Lucio, which Kevin thought was pretty cute. The courier was blown away by how beautiful the nymphs' homeland, Villa de Water, looked. Once they heard about Kevin and Lucio's deeds, the nymphs started bombarding him with questions. Kevin was getting overwhelmed with questions until, luckily, Matrina showed up. Matrina was the director of the shelter where all those nymphs came from. She invited Kevin inside, thanking him for making sure the kids weren't starving anymore. Kevin didn't know this, but apparently when a hero works with a nymph, part of the reward goes to her. Every time Kevin got paid for a job, Lucio got her cut and sent it back to the shelter. Kevin didn't get why Lucio did this, and Matrina told him her story. Over 20 years ago, a pale-faced nymph had come to her, looking like she was about to pass out. She asked Matrina to take care of her baby. That was how Matrina met Lucio for the first time.